Paint a picture, though. What kind of jobs were lost, and are these the kinds of jobs that will return?
Right, that's a very important question. So we know that first it was the service industry that was hit so hard. That's really what the March numbers painted for us. So the restaurants, hotels, bars, stores that all had to close first, that's where we saw the real losses in March. That picture has changed through the April numbers. It has spread more to construction and manufacturing jobs. Those were the hard hit sectors that we saw in April, relatively speaking, compared to that service industry that was hit first. Something else interesting that came out of these numbers is the gender gap, has narrowed. You know, we've been talking a lot about how hard women have been hit at the front of this pandemic in terms of jobs lost. But as those jobs move more to traditionally male-dominated industries, construction and manufacturing, we are seeing those that area narrow as well. Something that stood out to me, in addition from the job numbers, is that Quebec was the hardest hit. I believe the unemployment rate there is now at 17% compared to 13% nationwide. And of course, Quebec is also so hard hit by the pandemic. So a link there for sure.
Abigail, Ontario is now asking workers in education to help out in the health industry, for example, with long-term care. How does the province expect that to roll out, and what's the response from those workers?
That's a really good question. This was a new development that just came out in the past hour, a news release from the Doug Ford government saying that there's an emergency order signed by the government now in place, and the Premier himself is encouraging those working for school board, that he was careful, I think, to say school board employees rather than teachers specifically. So this is anybody employed by the school board, encouraging them to help and the list included hospitals, long-term care homes, retirement homes, and women's shelters were on the list as well. But there's, I'm sure, going to be a lot of reaction to that. So we're just waiting for that to start to come in, and how exactly that will work. There's a lot of questions there. I believe the Premier does have a media availability later today, so we'll see if there's a plan in place. The language that he used in this news release was voluntarily redeployed, so by choice to move to some of these places. But of course, with so many questions around PPE, that's just one example, I'm sure, of questions that workers will have as this all gets figured out. But the bottom line here is that those places need help, right? And that's why he's encouraging or trying ways to figure out how to get more hands on deck. Of course, we've seen the Army being called into long-term care homes in Ontario and in Quebec as well. So this call for school board employees to help is the latest on the list from Ontario.
Okay, let's talk about the Canada-U.S. border. The premiers and the Prime Minister held a conference call this week. Now, provincial leaders say they don't want to open the border. Do we get a sense of what's going to happen there?
That's a really good question as well. The Prime Minister has been very clear when he's been asked this, and he has been asked this quite a few times about, you know, is it time to reopen the border? When will that happen? And he has always been clear to this point that it's too early, and that that's a decision that will be made very carefully and based on the evidence of what's going on. But that is one to watch for sure. A lot of questions there about that border.